All right, I heard it. Greetings and welcome to the Chelsea Land Use Committee. My name is Carrie Keenan. Jeffrey LeFrancois and I are the co-chairs of the Chelsea Land Use Committee, which usually meets monthly, and this is our January meeting. Welcome, Jeffrey, to this new position. I'm super psyched to work with you, and I know that it will be amazing, and you'll bring all of your knowledge to Chelsea Land Use. So thank you for taking on the role and helping to lead.
Thank you, Gary.
Yeah.
And to Jessica.
And to Jessica, who I will miss deeply, but not really, because she's still obviously totally involved. So MCB4 has adopted a hybrid meeting policy whereby we will meet both in person and virtually. All community board committee meetings will require an in-person quorum to come to order and conduct business. Board members are expected to attend meetings in person unless they have a disability or an extraordinary circumstance, as defined by the New York State Open Meetings Law. Excused committee members and members of the public will still be able to participate virtually. Committee members who are joining via Zoom must leave their cameras on, please, especially to vote. We encourage members of the public to join virtually. Tonight's meeting is still being recorded and currently live streaming on YouTube. The MCB hybrid policy can be found on our website, as can our agenda for tonight, which is public. We encourage everyone to sign up for eBlast to get the agenda. If this is your first time at a CB4 meeting, there are some things to know. First, after each presentation, the committee will ask questions to the presenter, and then other CB4 members in attendance will be asked to comment or question. Subsequently, members of the public can ask questions or make a comment, and then the discussion goes back to the committee. On some agenda items, committee members may next vote to make a recommendation, which usually results in a letter for the full board to vote on. This process could involve further discussion on the topic at that time. If you're attending virtually and want to comment or ask a question after a presentation and after the committee and other CB4 members have spoken, you must press the raised hand button on your screen and we will call on you to unmute. I think we have quorum, Jeffrey. It's hard for me to tell.
We sure do.
Okay, great. So then I also want to just welcome, in addition to Jeffrey, Inga, welcome to the committee. It's nice to have you here. And we will get right to it. We have one agenda item tonight. I just want to say that unfortunately I have to leave the meeting at 8. And Jesse also has a hard 8:30 exit tonight for family reasons. And the Pier space closes at 9. So we'll try to be as efficient as possible and make sure that we can hear what everyone has to say as well. So I'm going to turn it over to Jeffrey, who's in the room, and he'll present the first agenda item. Thank you.
Thank you, Carrie, and thank you, everybody online and in person. It's great to be here in my new capacity as co-chair of Chelsea Land Use. I'm super excited to join this committee and be a part of continued discussions down here in Chelsea and, of course, across all of CB4. As Carrie mentioned, one item on the agenda this evening besides new business, if any, or old business, if any, at the end. But tonight we will have a presentation on the Fulton and Elliott Chelsea Houses redevelopment project draft scope of work to prepare for the draft environmental impact statement. For the past almost a year, you've been hearing us talk a lot about what's being proposed on the NYCHA development buildings just north of here in Chelsea. You're going to learn about tonight what a scope is, what a notice of intent is, all of which will inform the draft environmental impact statement, which is a study that is undertaken to inform any effects that are going to come out of a proposed to development. So the NYCHA team that is here and the development team that is here is going to walk you through all of these very technical details. I would also note that we received notice of intent and the notice of the intent about a week and a half ago, a week or so ago. A couple of things to know in advance on that. We will be a part of all the discussions and processes going forward. And one of the things that came out of that notice of intent is the public comment period that officially says it closes February 20th. However, we have requested that that comment period be extended to at least March 8th. This will allow this committee to have a preliminary discussion tonight, to then take up the sort of meat and potatoes of the draft scope of work at our February meeting, and then we can have a letter to vote on at our March 6th full board meeting, hence the extension of about a week and a half of that public comment period. There may be an update on that tonight already, but just so you know, we've already put that ask out there to make sure we can run this through our process. The two documents that have been circulated to the committee and that are obviously out for the public to review will be, like I said, summarized this evening, but note that we'll be assigning members of the committee specific segments of the draft scope of work document so that those can be digested and we can come back next month and have a discussion on all of those. Carrie and I have worked on assignments and we can obviously get feedback from you guys after the presentations and discussing from the public. And then just depending on, you know, the number of questions and Q&A and participation from the public this evening, as Carrie mentioned, we just want to be cognizant of our time tonight, both sort of starting from the end when the pier closes to Mr. Bodine having to leave and to Carrie as well. By no means are we trying to limit or stifle discussion, but just need to be cognizant of our time limits as well. And then just as Carrie mentioned, we will have the presentation. We'll then go to members of the committee. We'll then go to other members of Community Board 4, and then we'll go to members of the public for Q&A after that. You'll also hear tonight there's 3 public hearings that are already scheduled. There's other additional ways to have your comments heard, but I think the most important thing for tonight is the takeaway of what is exactly before us, so then we get to digest it and have another discussion on it in February. So I'm going to stop talking now and introduce Simon and Taylor from the NYCHA team who are here to present on the proposal in Chelsea this evening. Simon?
Sure. Thanks, Jeffrey. Thank you to Community Board 4 for having us tonight. It's good to be with you. My name is Simon Kowitsky. I am a vice president in the real estate department at NYCHA. I oversee our community planning and resident engagement efforts for the PACT program. And excited to speak with you about the environmental review for the Fulton Elliott Chelsea Houses redevelopment project. Joining me tonight are members of the NYCHA team as well as the development team. I know we have membership of the tenant association boards from the developments as well. Taylor Goldman, who is a senior environmental planner from the NYCHA team, will actually be giving the presentation, and then Taylor and I will take questions at the end. I do want to just state up front that I did receive the request from the community board to extend the comment period. I want to emphasize that it's really important for us that the community board has an opportunity to provide comment on this really important document, the scoping document, the draft scope of work, and that it can be incorporated into our environmental review process. So we are working to ensure that we would be able to accommodate a full board cycle for you. And I will have more information about when exactly the period would be extended to at a later date. So with that, I will turn it over to Taylor to walk us through a presentation, and then we can take questions.
Thanks, Simon. And thank you, community board members and members of the public that have come out and have joined online. We're really excited to get this part of the presentation and the process started. Is the presentation on? And I'll just tell you when to go next. Okay. So as was mentioned before, this is just to provide a general overview of the environmental review process and the draft scope of work. Next slide, please. So tonight we will go through environmental review background, what to expect with this process, the scoping period, and how to submit comments, an overview of the proposed actions, a general project timeline, and then we'll get into the Q&A. Next slide, please. So just to give a very high-level overview of what is environmental review, it is a process that projects go through to look at the natural, the human, and the built environment and impacts to those elements of the environment of the proposed project. So this Fulton Elliott Chelsea redevelopment project will be analyzed through a National Environmental Policy Act, referred to as NEPA, environmental impact statement. So it's a federal environmental review process, and it is the highest level of environmental review that a project can go through. It will be based on a reasonable range of alternatives that I'll give an overview for or through in a few slides. No decisions are made in an EIS. Rather, the document is something that influences decisions that are made. And the process as a whole really does prioritize engagement from the public and residents and elected officials. It's helpful that way to understand what is being proposed, as well as to provide the space for public comment. Next slide, please. Just to give a general overview of who is involved in this project, the New York City Department of Housing, Preservation, and Development will be what is called a responsible entity under NEPA on behalf of the City of New York. They are also joint lead agency, so we are working very closely with them throughout this whole process for the EIS. The New York City Housing Authority is the local project sponsor and a joint lead agency alongside New York City HPD. And then the overall PAC partner team, which is Essence Development, the related companies, and they have brought on Philip Habib and Associates, AKRF, and Hillman Consultants to perform this EIS process and the reports that go along with it. Next slide, please. So through the EIS, many areas will be analyzed in against what is being proposed. So there will be impacts analyzed against socioeconomic conditions, transportation, neighborhood character, air quality. Just about this entire list will be reflected in the EIS documents. Next slide, please. This is a very high-level overview of the overall environmental review process. So we are currently in the blue box where we have released the notice of intent to prepare the EIS, and we have also released the draft scope of work. Alongside those two releases comes the notification of public scoping meetings. And from the public scoping meetings and the close of the public comment period, there will be a final scope of work draft environmental impact statement released. There will be a second round of public comment periods and public meetings that are held on the draft EIS document that will then lead into a final environmental impact statement publication, followed by a record of decisions, statement of findings, summarizing the overall results of the EIS process. Next slide, please. Scoping is the early part of the EIS process that will help us to determine the impacts that should be analyzed through the EIS. HPD and NYCHA as joint lead agencies are engaging many groups, whether it's elected officials, members, or federal, state, local governments, residents, other members of the public, to identify concerns, potential impacts, and possible alternatives to the proposed project. So this process is important so that we hear from the public general issues and analysis that should be included in the scope of work, methodologies for how this analysis will be performed, alternatives to the proposed project, and special conditions that maybe members of the community have in relation to these projects or these campuses. Next slide, please. There are many ways how to participate. This meeting tonight is just a general overview. In order to provide comments on the draft scope of work, you may submit your comments by attending a scoping meeting and giving comments in person, through email, and the email address is up on the screen, or you can mail a letter to the Department of Housing, Preservation, and Development, specifically. And this is running from January 8th when the NOI was released. And we will follow up if there's a revision to the end of the scoping period. Next slide. That's okay. Okay, so this is just general information on how people have been notified. The FEC residents were given a flyer the same day that the NOI was released. Residents will also be receiving robocalls and emails leading up to the meeting. Stakeholders' emails have been sent to city and state agencies, elected officials, and the community board members. And the local community will be notified through publications in newspapers. So there will be 5 different NOIs released in newspapers in the required languages, so English, Spanish, traditional and simplified Chinese, and Russian. And we also issued a press announcement on January 8th. Next slide, please. Okay. Okay. Yeah. Keep going. Okay. I can keep going. Okay. I can speak. So when are these meetings? The first one will be held on February 1st, beginning at 6 p.m. at the Fulton Houses. The second one will be held online through Zoom on Monday, February 5th, starting at 4 p.m. And then the third meeting will be held on February 7th, beginning at 6:30 at NYCHA Houses. A general run of show, a presentation will be made by HPD, NYCHA, and the PAC partner, giving meeting rules, a general overview of the proposed actions, and a technical overview of what is currently included in the draft scope of work and what is being analyzed. Public comment, that will be a period after the presentation where members of the public are able to stand up and give verbal comment. It will be 3 minutes per person, 5 minutes if you need translation. If you're an elected official, you receive an unlimited amount of time to comment. And the meeting ends when the last person stands up and provides their comment. So the meeting will last until everybody has had a chance to provide a public comment, if they choose to. Next slide, please. So now we'll get into just a general overview of the proposed actions. As we know, this project is located across 2 NYCHA campuses, Fulton Houses to the south, and Elliott, Chelsea, and Chelsea Additions on the northern side of this map. There are a total of 2,056 existing dwelling units in these 2 developments. Next slide. Fulton Houses was built in early 1960s. It's a total of 11 buildings, 3 25-story buildings and 8 7-story buildings, a total of 944 apartments with approximately 2,100 residents. There is the Hudson Guild Community Facility Space located in Building 7. Next slide, please. Elliott Houses was built in the 1940s, made up of 4 11 and 12-story buildings, 591 apartments with approximately 1,400 residents. There is a 1-story Hudson Guild Children's Center located within Elliott Houses. Next slide, please. Chelsea Houses and Chelsea Addition. Chelsea Houses, which is on the bottom block with buildings labeled 1 and 2, was built in the early 1960s, and it's made up of 2 21-story buildings with 425 apartments, approximately 1,000 residents. Chelsea Addition on the northern block was built in 68. Thank you. 96 apartments. It is the senior building, and Hudson Guild Community Center is located in this building. Next slide, please. The proposed actions overview include applications to the United States Department of Housing and Urban Development, HUD, under NYCHA's Permanent Affordability Commitment Together, the PACT program. And this is for the disposition of public housing property authorized through Section 18 of the United States Housing Act of 1937. This is also through the rental assistance demonstration program that will convert the subsidies under Section 9 that are currently existing on site into project-based vouchers, PBV subsidies under Section 8. This would allow the staged replacement and demolition of all existing dwelling units and community facility spaces at the project sites with the staged development of additional new mixed-use buildings across the project sites. Next slide, please. Through the EIS, there are a total of 4 alternatives that have been identified. So the first alternative is the no action alternative, and it kind of sets a baseline throughout the EIS. This assumes that the existing buildings will continue to exist as they do today. So it is those 22 existing buildings. The tallest building on site would remain at 25 stories. The 2,056 existing residential units will remain as they are today, with the total community facility space also existing. There are 95 accessory parking spaces at Fulton houses that would also remain. So this alternative assumes that the only improvements that would be anticipated by the 2040 build year that is analyzed in the EIS as typical capital repairs as needed. So they would operate as they stand today. No new development would occur on the site. The second alternative that has been identified does anticipate land use actions through the New York City Uniform Land Use Review process, the ULURP process. These include a zoning map amendment to establish zoning districts to allow 12 floor area ratio or FAR to be permitted within 100 feet of avenues and 8 FAR along the mid blocks beyond 100 feet of the avenues. It would establish a commercial overlay where needed and appropriate to allow proposed retail and supermarket uses in the building bases along avenues. A zoning text amendment to designate the project sites as mandatory inclusionary housing, MIH areas, and a large-scale general development LSGD special permit to facilitate the proposed site plan by allowing the distribution of floor area without having to comply with zoning lot line requirements or district boundaries, and the location of buildings without regard for applicable yard, court, and distance between buildings. Next. So the rezoning alternative with these approvals through the ULURP process would result in 15 new buildings across the sites, across both sites, with the tallest building on site being 39 stories. There will be a total of 5,510 dwelling units. That is inclusive of 2,056 project-based Section 8 units for the full replacement of existing NYCHA units on site, with an additional 3,454 new dwelling units made up of 1,038 affordable dwelling units and 2,416 market rate units. There will be a total of 144,082 gross square feet of community facility neighborhood space, and that's made up of the full replacement of 56,859 gross square feet of existing space and an additional 87,223 gross square feet of community facility neighborhood center space. There will be an introduction of daycare space, medical office space, local retail, and supermarket space across both campuses. There will also be one additional parking space at Fulton Houses for a total of 96 parking spaces. The third alternative that has been identified is the non-rezoning alternative, which anticipates development that would be permitted under current site conditions. And this alternative would result in 17 new buildings, with the tallest building on site being 39 stories, a total of 3,839 dwelling units, comprised of 2,056 project-based Section 8 units for the full replacement of the existing NYCHA units on site, with an additional 1,783 new dwelling units, made up of 536 affordable dwelling units and 1,247 market rate units. There would be a total of 175,007 gross square feet of community facility and neighborhood space, with the full replacement. That's inclusive of the full replacement of 56,859 gross square feet of the existing space, and an additional 118,148 gross square feet of community facility and neighborhood space. Similar to the rezoning alternative, there would be an introduction of daycare space, medical office space, local retail and supermarket space, as well as that one additional parking space at Fulton Houses for a total of 96 spaces. Next slide. As part of the EIS process, this fourth alternative is standard to be included. So when a project would result in significant adverse impacts, we will identify a no significant adverse impact alternative. This assumes that any time that a significant adverse impact has been identified, the alternative will be adjusted to mitigate automatically for that adverse impact. Next slide, please. This is just a general overview for comparison between the alternatives. The no significant adverse impact will be developed as the significant adverse impacts are identified from the proposed actions. Next slide, please. This is a very general project milestone overview. So the EIS process is slated to be complete by the end of 2024. The project construction will is anticipated to begin the beginning of 2025, if necessary, depending on the alternative that is identified as the preferred alternative through the EIS process. We will go through our pre-certification and ULURP process, and that's those in the red dashed box. The replacement buildings would be completed by 2030 under the rezoning alternative, or 2033 under the non-rezoning alternative, with the rest of the mixed income buildings being completed through 2040. Next slide, please. This slide is specific to the rezoning alternative because the other alternatives do not need to go through ULURP. So for the rezoning alternative, this would be an anticipated step schedule. So environmental review, as the environmental review process is happening, pre-certification with engagement with NYCHA residents, CB4, elected officials, and DCP to finalize site plans and land use actions that will then lead into the ULURP process in 2025 once environmental review is completed. Next slide, please. Again, to reiterate, this was a general overview for the draft scope of work and what is to be expected. If there are any comments around the draft scope of work, they are required to be submitted through these three avenues. So attending a public scoping meeting through email or mailing a letter for us to properly respond to them in the final scope of work. Next slide, please. that should be it. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Taylor. So now we will go to questions from the committee. I also just want to say that Taylor highlighted the 3 required public hearings that are being held as part of this process. That's separate and apart from any meetings the board decides to have, be they committee meetings or our public hearings at our full board. So that's always in addition to anything that's required by law, both federal, state, and city. Carrie and I talked about this in advance. We're going to go to questions in the room from committee members. We'll then go online to committee members. We'll then go to members of the community board, and then we'll go to the public. So I'm going to start with my colleagues in the room on Chelsea Land Use. Any questions or comments from that presentation today? And just to note, the key thing about scope is getting in things that we want studied. Now is the opportunity to throw things out there to be considered as they think about what's being proposed. A lot of what you heard about is a worst case scenario situation. If we want to think about it that way, what is a worst case we want considered? So hands please, and we'll sort of pass mics so that way folks online can hear, and then the team can address the questions. I'm going to come down to you, David, with the mic, and then we'll pass it down.
Hi, thanks for the presentation. I noticed that the no zoning change option would include 39-story towers, or are they allowed under the current zoning?
Sorry, let me just check the materials and confirm that for you. If you just give me 1 second. So yeah, the answer is yes.
Okay, I'm surprised by that. There aren't, I don't think there are any buildings of that size in Chelsea that I can think of, except maybe 6th Avenue above 25th Street or so. In terms of the different options, the no change option is kind of a baseline that we can use as a reference. I know that a few years ago, there was a proposal to keep the existing buildings, at least at Fulton Houses, and build a new building on 19th Street that would serve, I think, as swing space and then as market rate to fund the restoration of the existing buildings. Is there any opportunity for an option like that among the ones that you're presenting? And, just as a point of reference, I think the last time we needed to digest something this big, it was the Empire Station complex that was proposed around Penn Station, where they were proposing 28 million square feet of office space that was meant to help fund the renovation of Penn Station. But it was hard to get a grip on how much of that development was actually needed to meet the need. So I think it might be useful if we had as a kind of datum how much development would be needed as sort of, I guess it would be a 5th option, so that we know how much of either the zoning required or rezoning required options are absolutely necessary. And it would be kind of a hybrid solution where the existing buildings are kept, but it would be made feasible. Is that an option to include, just so that we know how much of all of the options are absolutely necessary?
So that's a great idea that can absolutely be submitted, and we would analyze it and provide comment as part of the environmental review process.
And how did you determine the number of parking units that would be kept, even if you go beyond the no change option?
The 95 parking spaces at Fulton is what you're referencing. Those are existing today, that exist on site today. So those will be kept.
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to say we shouldn't keep them, but I think we might want to reconsider it. They were designed, the development was designed back in the days of Robert Moses. We're now looking forward to congestion pricing. There's an assemblyman in Queens named David Ruppern who always argued against congestion pricing on the basis that poorer people in his district wouldn't be able to drive to jobs in Manhattan. That kind of case can't really be made here, and we seem to be in a different age. And if you just bear with me a second. Okay. The no significant impact solution, could you talk a little bit more about that and what it might look like?
So it really is dependent on the significant adverse impact that is determined after the draft scope of work is the public comment period is completed and the final scope of work is released alongside the DEIS. That's where that really comes to light. The DEIS has to be performed and created first for us to really know which areas of analysis would result in significant adverse impact. So unfortunately, we don't have, it'll be developed as the process goes on.
Okay, so it's kind of an optimal scheme that would take into account things beyond this is what you can build as of right zoning.
Yeah, it'll be compared alongside the purpose and need of the project as well to see how feasible it would be.
Thank you.
Brad, do you have a question? Oh, I just had a really quick question, ripping off of the parking space. Are parking spaces, are they going to be on the ground or are you going to have a parking garage?
Hi, Jamar Adams, Managing Principal of Essence Development, PAC partner, development partner. So yes, the parking will be at grade on the without zoning scheme, and then in the rezoning scheme at Fulton, a portion will be at grade, and a very small portion will be below grade.
So important. I'm going to say, why not do below grade since, space is so important, green space and that sort of thing.
I mean, that all can be analyzed as a part of the analysis. Thank you.
Hi. So is there any way to make a comparison between the EIS and the EIS statement between the impact on the environment for demoing all of those properties and rebuilding as compared to leaving them standing and rehabbing their interiors?
That will be taken into consideration in the EIS.
Will that become evident, obvious, understandable?
There will be discussion throughout how we landed at the proposed alternatives or any other alternatives that are recommended through the public scoping period.
Thank you.
Are all these points going to be, that have to be emailed to you? But I think per the meeting, you guys are going to take the notes and add that to the list or not? Or are we going to write a letter?
We're not writing a letter tonight. Tonight is preliminary discussion for you guys to understand what's about to kick off. We're then going to give assignments, homework to the group between now and our next committee meeting. So that way we can come and have a fuller conversation about what is being proposed in the draft scope of work. Hector?
Yeah. I just want to emphasize on that point too, that, tonight is kind of a courtesy preview of the information that we'll be sharing at the public hearings. Any feedback you give us tonight, we're not recording. We're not going to be taking into consideration as part of our formal environmental review. You have to submit it to us via one of those 3 avenues that Taylor described. So you have to either submit it as testimony during the public hearings, put it in writing and email it to us, or put it in a letter and put it in the snail mail to us.
Yeah, I don't, back to the parking. I know you mentioned Fulton houses, but there is parking at Elliott Chelsea as well, at 401 West 25th Street and the areas by the dumpsters, which the employees seem to have commandeered a while back. So. Yeah. Yeah, what's going to happen with that?
So 401, the ones that are in the building on 9th Avenue and 25th Street will remain, obviously. There's an easement that is right now between that building and NYCHA. that easement will stay in place and will be transferred into the partnership between NYCHA and the development partners. So that will remain. So that's why we didn't bring it up, because it's kind of not on our site, but their easement exists.
Just one last question. Originally, we were supposed to start this back last year, obviously during the summertime. And because of the difficulties we've run into, it's been extended all the way out to 24 to 30, and beyond. So can you explain to me why that is? I mean, is it because of all the difficulties or because of, opposition we've been seeing?
I mean, I can speak to that. I think that generally speaking, in order to do this right, we needed to go through this environmental review process. And so that's what's adding the additional time. We're want to make sure that we provide adequate amount of time for the analysis to be done, for people to provide comments. So that's the major change between what was shared earlier and where we are now.
Okay, thanks.
I have a series of questions that are more specific to the scope than to the process. Would you rather hear them now, Jeffrey, or is that something you want to do later? Like,
keep the technicals and like process on this first round.
Jeffrey, we can't hear you.
Jeffrey said no, it's going to come
Thank you,
later.
Jessica. No, we're going to hold on a scope questions this evening for now and get through everybody's sort of technical stuff on the process and where we are. Because at our next meeting, we're going to have a fuller discussion once everybody's read what's been proposed. Not everybody can be you, Paul.
All right, so then I have a quick question on
out there.
process, which is probably slightly controversial. In the beginning entry of the scope, it does talk about process. And it talks about the working group and the process we went through to get to where we are today. And the RFP did not entail demolition. The working group concluded that it would not be demolition. And now I'm wondering if there is any possibility of having the RFP go reissued, have another development team come in, present alternatives that could maybe address many of the concerns that have been raised by the community, and just reopen the process. I've been hesitant to ask that question during this time frame because that's going to elongate it. And Hector's point that this is already dragging on, and I don't want to see NYCHA residents continue to have to drag this process. But I am questioning the fact that the RFP was issued. We're in a whole different environment now. There was no demolition. We're now talking about complete demolition and new reconstruction. And I'm wondering if there's a possibility of reissuing the RFP and starting over. You don't necessarily have to answer that question now. I'm just going on record to say that. Thank you.
That's my primary question for the whole process.
RFP.
Yeah, so no, it's a good question. So the RFP, all of the procurements that we do to identify development partners under the PACT program do set forth certain guidelines or principles that we ask for in terms of submitting proposals to us. But we do reserve the flexibility in those documents to make changes, quite substantial changes at our discretion to the project scope in terms of the nature of the rehab, the level of the investment, or even new construction. So we are exercising that right that we maintained in the RFP. We did go through a process with resident leaders and residents across the campuses to really make sure that they understood what the development team uncovered when they got on site. Because remember, when they responded to the RFP, that wasn't based on any physical inspections of the property. They were utilizing information that NYCHA passed on that it turns out was largely inaccurate and in many ways dated. So they did their own inspections. They identified issues that maybe weren't apparent at the beginning when they submitted the proposal. And we went through a process with residents to make sure that that information was really clear and understood. And then they developed different strategies and approaches that, again, we put toward the community, and they gave us feedback on the direction that they wanted to go, knowing all these different trade-offs in terms of timing.
How was the meeting documented? Sure. How was the meeting documented with the residents?
How are they documented? So there were, I forget the number, there were over 24 different meetings across both campuses, and in addition to site tours of properties that the team has redeveloped in other parts of the city. And so those engagements happened, over the course of the springtime earlier this year.
Before the presentation started, you made a point, there was a question, Jeffrey, you made a point about the timing of our community board meeting and how it is that we were looking to elongate the process so that we could participate in the way that we desire. You responded to that by saying it was under consideration. When is that decision going to be made? Who makes that decision in terms of the timing? Sorry, I'm asking a question of the speaker.
So that would be a joint decision between with NYCHA and HPD as the lead agencies. I'm hoping to be able to share that decision with you as soon as possible, but I don't have an answer as of yet. I do understand that you want to be able to host a full board cycle, which would include your full board meeting on the 6th to be able to sign off on a letter with comments. So we're aware of the time constraints.
Separate item. Again, I think this body is not just interested, but is communicating its desire to do that and would sort of lean into that. The other point of this was to say what's of interest. Here's what's of interest to me and an item that I would expect to hear more about as this process unfolds. If I look at the rezoning alternative versus the non-rezoning alternative, there's a significant difference between the community facility and neighborhood center space that becomes accessible. And so I guess I'd like to know more about that difference. There's an impact there as well, presumably in terms of community members who are seeking to access that space. And obviously one alternative would allow for perhaps more than less. There's also a timing issue, right, related to zoning versus the alternative, meaning when those spaces would actually be open for business again in service to community members. So I just want to emphasize once again to this team, there is a neighborhood center, there's a community facility in that space, multiple in that space that serve New Yorkers, serve residents, and there needs to be attention paid to that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Real quick. Carrie, I see your hand. So if you could moderate the online portion, we're going to go to the members of the committee. Brad, actually, sorry, I missed Brad. Back to Brad for a second.
Back to Brad.
In this study, are they actually going to compare like a green roof, solar, green energy? No, I'm just want to hear from them. I didn't see anything on that. And I just want to make a point to that. So they compare the difference of non-alt change. That's just my question.
Yeah, anything related to building design, climate change, greenhouse gas emissions, those are all areas of the EIS to be analyzed against through each alternative.
Sorry, Brad, we can't hear
Yep.
you. Can we get you the mic?
Yep, he's asking what the difference between a smaller development with a green roof and versus a bigger development without one, or if there are going to be specific requirements for the development as it relates to sort of green infrastructure. Is that fair, Brad?
Yeah, that'll be analyzed through the EIS. Yeah, no, anything that is required through local law related to the seeker technical manual and the NEPA, those will all be analyzed through the.
To your point, so a New York City requirement is if we have a roof, it either has to be green or it has to have mechanical space on there or has a solar. You can't. There's only that's the requirement for New York City. So, right.
Allow him to looking like Caesar right now. You're looking like Caesar right now, my friend. Carrie, I think that's it from the committee in the room. So over to you officially now.
All right, I'm going to go to Viren, who I see first, and then Betty.
Yeah, just a couple of quick questions. David has covered quite a bit, and I think the fifth option that he mentioned, the question is, are you going to consider that fifth option where you retain existing buildings as they are and add density along with that? Would that be an option that you would include in your EIS? That is question number one. And if you answer that question, I'll go to the next one afterwards.
Sure. Any alternative that is requested to be analyzed through the proper channels and through the scoping process that's occurring right now will be analyzed or considered for analysis through the EIS process.
Thank you. And the second question I have is I'm going to go back to the process question. Somebody asked that question as well, how it was recorded and documented. Is that something that you can make available? So if I can sort of put it across more bluntly, we keep hearing from the community, from NYCHA residents all the time that there was no vote. The vote is being discussed and a survey is being discussed all the time. We have not seen that document. We do not understand how the decision was made about doing anything you want to do at Chelsea and Elliott houses as well as Fulton. Do you have any documentation that you would be able to share with the Community Board 4, which shows that either you took a vote or a survey was signed off by the residents?
So the information about the survey that was conducted specifically is available on our website. We're not in a position to share any additional information beyond what has already been shared.
Is it a signed document where you have collected signatures from NYCHA residents, or is it something that is just recorded as statement of fact?
Those are results of the surveys that we've shared.
Meaning with the numbers and data associated with those results?
Again, I'm not in a position to share any additional information.
That's it, Carrie. Thank you.
Folks, if we could have respect for the fact that the folks online can't hear anybody who's not on a microphone. So all they can hear is me speaking right now, and we're going to keep it to the folks that are online. The board is in receipt of the survey. The board, there is a copy of the survey online. Yes, what people were asked, that's a copy of the survey. That was the question. So Carrie, I'm going to go back to you online.
Thanks, Vera, and I think your point is well taken. Thank you. Betty?
Yes, good evening. I also agree with Aaron's questions. I have a couple of things. Will the environmental document discuss the relocation of residents during demolition? And will it compare the existing facilities to the proposed project? In other words, like how much open space are on both campuses, how many playgrounds there are, that kind of thing. Are those two kinds of things going to be discussed?
Yes, those will be discussed in the EIS documents.
And they will be, okay. And will the presentation you showed tonight be public? Can we see it on your website or our website?
Yes, it will be on the community board's website.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Betty. I don't see any other hands except mine from the committee. So this is a little bit redundant, but I just feel the need to be redundant. I'm confused about, David asked a question, Dave Holoka asked a question at the very beginning about how is the rezoning plan versus the non-rezoning plan helping NYCHA residents? And it's a little bit hard to see that from this presentation. Can you maybe speak to that?
So there are some differences between the rezoning and the non-rezoning alternative scenarios. Once this is posted, it'll probably be easier to make this comparison. There is a slide that shows the different number of dwelling units, square footage of different community facility spaces, and the building heights, we know the max building heights are the same, but there's also information in the scope around site planning. The more of the information about community design and those things will be made apparent through the process. But overall, there are also time considerations. It would take longer to complete the replacement buildings under the non-rezoning alternative. We have to build them in a larger number of phases. So that delivers replacement housing for the NYCHA residents on a longer time frame. Those are just some of the differences to summarize.
Thanks, Simon. I don't mean to be combative, but we have, so the premise of this meeting tonight is that we have the extension to be able to collect all the information and comments and then create a letter to be approved by full board in March. So I would love for you to tell us that that's happening, because otherwise we have to come up with a totally different plan. That's one. And then you say it will be made apparent through the process. We don't have time for things to be made apparent through the process. So I'm a bit, confused by those kinds of comments. Like, we need to know, we need the information. We've been asking since, I want to say June, but maybe it was July. So don't mean to be, irritating, but I'm not sure that's sufficient.
So thank you for the feedback. So the level of information that we're sharing right now at the outset is, from my understanding, fairly typical for a scoping document. And is just important so that we can further shape and analyze the alternatives. We will make sure that there's adequate time for the board to submit comments.
But does that mean that sorry, can you be specific?
I don't have a date right now. I am trying to balance requests from a number of different stakeholders. So the exact date to which we would extend the comment period is not one that I can give at this moment, but I do want to reassure you that we will make sure that the board has the opportunity to provide comment.
Okay.
And I just want to add for the room, Carrie, in addition, like, we made this request assignment, but we've also let all our elected officials know that this is sort of outside of how we typically operate. And we're going to expect them to also advocate if there is not, on our behalf, if there's not an answer that we feel we can adequately participate within in terms of the time frame in response to this process.
Right. Understood. But we are the stakeholders of the community. So, I would think that might be the biggest stakeholder.
No,
Sorry,
absolutely.
I'm just looking at my notes to see if I just have one other weird question. Like, I think Dave Holoka brought it up, but if you are concerning the rezoning versus non-rezoning, if you are going from an R8 FAR to an R12 FAR, how do you do that without rezoning?
Under the non-rezoning alternative that would be developed under current site conditions and characteristics, there would not be any land use actions to increase the FAR.
Can you just explain that so everyone understands how that works?
So, yes, this is Jamar Adams again. So, under the non-zoning scheme, we would execute and plan to do the 3 phases for replacement, as well as the mixed income housing as laid out in the presentation about how many units, because the buildings that would be built without rezoning would be built within the current confines of the zoning of the current site. So that's the nuance there. And So in the rezoning scheme, we'd be going through a ULURP or seeking a ULURP. And if the ULURP were approved, then we'd be building based upon what zoning was approved as a part of the ULURP. Is there a more specific question that you're asking that like we can try to put a final point to?
I think then why are you going for a ULURP?
So to make it very, very straightforward is that it was put forth to the residents as a part of the process when we were talking to them and talking with them. But there was two options. There was a option where there was without rezoning and a plan with the rezoning. So with rezoning, their replacement buildings, so their 2,056 units, will be completed within 2 phases. Without rezoning, so therefore in the current zoning of the current 2 sites, it would take 3 phases, and therefore the replacement building, so the replacement of the 2,056 units would happen quicker with the rezoning in a slower period of time from the start of construction without rezoning. So that's the kind of nuance there.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
We have Viren's hand up again, but I don't know, Jeffrey, if you want to go to the room, if there are other, people who have another comment, or Viren, do you just want to make a quick comment?
Yeah, it's just a very quick comment. I think last time when you came and presented to CLU, we had asked for unit distribution and family composition of existing NYCHA apartments that you have at both locations. Has that work been done, or will that work be done and provided to us at some point?
I'm sorry, I missed the beginning of the question. Was it about? Can you repeat?
Sorry, the previous presentation that you guys made to CLU, the question was raised about family composition of existing NYCHA units. And the question was, would you be looking at that composition in terms of the new replacement units distribution at both locations? Part number 1. And the second question is, there is a seniors building there and there are senior citizens. Would you be making any provisions for senior citizens or in both at both locations?
Thank you for repeating that. So absolutely, we have to understand the composition of the households that currently reside at Fulton Elliott Chelsea houses and make sure that we can accommodate them in the replacement buildings that are being designed. There are different ideas that have been posed in terms of providing safe space for the seniors that are potentially exclusive to seniors, and we can analyze what that would look like. Potentially reserving lower floors in one of the replacement buildings for the senior households, as an example.
Right, but one part of the question is, would you be sharing that information with the Community Board 4?
What kind of information are you looking for? Are you looking for kind of demographic information or?
Demographic, number of units, size of units, where?
Oh, I understand. I understand. Thank you for clarifying, Joe. So we're working on a response to that letter that you shared with us that did include a detailed template that we're going to look at filling in for you, but we have not pulled that together yet. We're going to prioritize that for you. Thank you. Thanks, Joe.
And then on this end, just Jessica will be the last speaker.
Thank you. Simon, I appreciate you mentioning this from the top about the comment period. I just want to emphasize that both for the comment period and also the hearings that you're scheduling, and I know we've talked about this before, just as much, we just really ask that you all be in touch with us as proactively as possible as you prepare for the release of these documents and the scheduling of events. As you can hear from all of us, we're, as a board and as representatives of the community, we're very invested in this process, and the ability for us to participate fully in those community events where we can also hear increasingly, from other folks in the community is so important to our ability to then communicate effectively with all of you between hearings and in all of the other opportunities that we have. So I just really want to thank you for reconsidering the deadline on the deadline, and just really request that you include us as much as possible in any future planning efforts so we can be sure we are fully aligned.
Thanks so much for that comment. I absolutely agree, and lesson learned will be coordinated going forward through the next steps of this process.
Thanks. Back in the room, David, I'm going to go because we did a round of committee members that I just want to flag that I think we should have said earlier, many of our questions remain outstanding and unanswered that we've sent. We've sent a number of letters over the past 6 to 8 months. I will say some, I think, begin to get addressed in the draft scope of work. As you begin to chew that up, I think you'll see that, but I think we still have a long way to go. Some of that is tonight, but also this conversation is not stopping just because we're at this point in the stage. So I'm going to go to Joe next, and then we will open it up to committee for further comment, but then I want to go to the public as well.
So Simon, as I would note, series of questions, right? The first one is on the comment issue, the comment deadline. I want to say honestly, Jessica is an excellent new chair, being very diplomatic. I have no issue to do that. The fact that you've scheduled your public hearings on dates when we have committee meetings or our full board meeting is ridiculous, number one. Number two, when you make a presentation and say, as a courtesy, you are here. You are not here as a courtesy. You're representing a public agency that is a major landowner in our district, and you should watch the language when you work this stuff because it creates people sitting around me, members, immediately hackled up, all right? The second thing is time was taken to do it right. Not to do it right. You have a NEPA that you must go through. You had to prepare for it, and it was not fully prepared. And it misleads both the community and the tenants for and against, because you created an expectation this would have happened much sooner, right? So really not good. And the last part is on the RFP, the question that was raised, the flexibility to make changes. This is not a flexibility to make changes. You've taken an RFP, which was for renovation and some infill, and just started anew. So that's a real question, right? And many agencies have RFPs. They rarely throw the entire RFP out and do something entirely different. This leads me into the next issue. I find it astounding that you would say you are not able to share information. On page 9 of your document, the whole initials, the thing set out, it talks about, hold on, you have your phone ringing? Oh, okay. All right. So your document says that you had 35 meetings. You have residents 18 years and older indicated their preferences using either an online or paper survey. So I want to note, first of all, for the first time you said survey. It's been characterized a lot of times as a vote. There are no votes in this. It was a survey. But then our committee members ask you, where's the information? How did it done? And the fact that you can say we're not going to disclose that creates more suspicion and concern that the process is secretive. Okay. And I want to say honestly, irrespective of for or against, you create an impression by not just, please guys, please, excuse me. You create an impression that it's, please Caesar, Peter, Caesar. You create an impression that you're trying to conceal something, right? And the truth is, as part of this, you are obligated in the scoping process to disclose information, not to hold on to information. And irrespective, at the end of the day, this may be a very different proposal than we worked through in the whole Chelsea working group, but you can't keep relying upon something that is concealed or not out in the open. So I'm going to ask publicly, and we're going to ask in our scoping document to divulge this information and disclose it. Because you know something, irrespective of what happened, it's got to be out there so it can be dealt with directly. Next thing is, in terms of studying, yes, we talked about the possibility of senior housing on senior buildings that are one in Fulton, one in Elliott Chelsea. That's something I'm going to raise as part of the scoping session because seniors have said they prefer to live in their own building. It's a different kind of building than a family building, right? The next thing is Hudson Guild. I'd like to dispel once and for all that Hudson Guild serves NYCHA only. It is a major community resource, and Hudson Guild cannot be moved off this site. It needs to be a new facility built prior to anything. It's going to cause disruption from the toddlers to from the toddlers to the seniors and everything in between, right? I say this because you may not know, Hudson Guild actually provides social services for supportive housing and Hell's Kitchen that I do. So the idea that you can somehow easily, quickly move something around, you've got to make adjustments in a plan that if there's a rebuilding or partial or full, the guild is rebuilt part of it first to not disrupt the services. It affects so many people across the West Side. All right. Next thing is that this you are proposing. It's a Kerry. It's an R8 with a 6.02 FAR, and the proposal is to go to an R10 bonusable to 12, right? With a 12 FAR in total. That is more than double. It's double. It's 3 million square feet additional, right? The committee members here are trying to understand what that means. And the question is, to what degree, how much new construction is needed to provide capital to do the additional work in buildings, whether it's renovation or rebuilding. One of the things you have not been clear about, and I want to be honest, the team presentation tonight was not very adept at just answering a question. And I'm going to ask again going forward when you come to us, answer a question. If somebody says, how can you build this? The answer is it's an R8 zone and there's no height limits and it's a large scale plan. We can move all the development rights to one location. Just say that. When you give a technical answer as per the SECRA manual, or someone asks you about environmental things or green, and you say just say, describe it. It helps the public and the people who are going to watch this recording understand what the hell's going on. The next thing is, I have a question for you, and am I incorrect? And I ask, I guess, Greg or Jamar, these buildings, the NYCHA campuses are part of a large scale plan. Isn't that correct? Or did that not exist in the 1961 zoning? That's an inquiry to you. Because the reason I ask that is because we have developed, Miguel, where I worked with 401 West 25th Street and the one on 18th Street, that we found that there were problems when you built a new building in the campus, that it didn't fit and there were all these different things. So how can you, even though it's R8, as of right, you want to build a 39-story tower, right? How do you not deal with the plan that was filed as part of the original urban, so these were urban renewal buildings back in the 50s and the 60s. I thought you had to, when you, like in Clinton urban renewal, we've had to go through the plan. Remember, Jeffrey, like Site 7, all these different buildings had to go through a modification of the plan. Right, I'm gonna go. I want to get it out there so it gets into the record. In Hudson Yards, we had 19 different options, folks, that we raised as additional things to study. So part of the work as a community board is to raise multiple options to be looked at and studied. And I'm going to say an option that includes new construction and renovation should be one on the table very clearly with infill. The parking issue, Jamar, should be included. It's an easement. It's part of the plan because it's part of the legal structure that we worked on 401 West 25th Street, Miguel and I. It's got to show in there somewhere. So again, options where there's no market rate units included. Options where there's no MIH needed. Because just because MIH exists as a zoning tactic doesn't mean that the city owns this. They can just say, you developer must do X number of units and put a deed restriction on it. I mean, I'm trying to get it out of formula into possibility of something that every sector of the community can live with. And right now, the current thing feels very much like it's litigation and controversy and dispute. So we really are trying to work with you going forward to something that can be achievable. And I'm not saying everyone's going to be happy any side of it, but being achievable is an important thing. All right. Thank you.
Thanks, Joe. I want to add something that stood out to me. What has been described in the scope of work is what is going to be taken up based on the 4 proposals. When we send you our letter, how do we make sure something that we want works its way into proposal 1, proposal 2, proposal 3? Are there requirements for you to take up that? For example, my suggestion to consider studying more height and density mid-block versus on the avenues, as opposed to what's being proposed now, which is a lot of height on the avenues and less mid-block. So I'm curious how that sort of gets analyzed.
It's a good question. And we have Ethan Goodman, who is Land Use Counsel for the development team. Ethan, do you want to respond to that question?
Sure. So first off, let me just touch on something that Joe mentioned before. And I think this is the second meeting which I heard Joe mention it and talk about a doubling of FAR. So it's not a doubling of FAR, so everybody's clear. And there's a little confusion. People sometimes confuse. Joe wasn't doing this, but in general, zoning district designations with FARs. Just to stick with FAR, Joe is correct. It's a 6.02 FAR on essentially all of the campus right now, minus a few residual areas that are in the Special West Chelsea district. It is currently a 6. The proposal here is to upzone to indeed a 10 bonusable to 12, but only within 100 feet of the avenues. The vast majority of the land would be up.
Ethan, I need to ask you to pause for just a second. We're addressing something in the room. If you can pause, because you're sharing a lot of good information. And I'm just going to fill the time with some awkward talking while something is taken care of. Sometimes that's what you have to do as a new co-chair in a committee. But if you'll just indulge us online for just another second or two, we should have this wrapped up in the room. Oh, you're right, Brad. I should adjust. The question was asked of what I use in my hair. Some dry shampoo today. There's a Thank you, Ethan. You can continue. Appreciate that.
Sure. Right. So the avenues would be up.
Hold on one more sec. I misspoke.
Forgive
We're
me.
getting
I can't
there.
hear any of that from here.
Just one more sec. Ethan, the floor is now yours.
Great. So yes, it's a 10 bonusable to 12 on the avenues and within 100 feet. For all of the mid-block land, it would be an 8 FAR, right? So it's going from a 6 to an 8. I wouldn't want you to quote me on what the actual blended maximum FAR is on the entire campus, but I think it's likely closer to a 9 or a 9 and change than a 12. So it's not a doubling. It'd be more like a 50% or slightly higher than a 50% increase. That's just a factual correction there. With respect to large scale, this is not part of a large scale general development or a large scale residential development. It's not bound by prior approvals, so we're not dealing with that in terms of a redevelopment as of right or with a rezoning. And then finally, the question with respect to how do things get into the final scope and in the EIS. So the lead agencies will take all the comments that are submitted from the community board, from all the other members of the public, and it will be up to the lead agencies to determine what is warranted to be included in the EIS for the studies. We couldn't say right now what would go in, what would not go in, but the discretion is in the lead agencies and their co-leads here. So it would be HPD and NYCHA that'll decide what finally gets in.
A follow-up to that, Ethan. So we're asking something very specific to be studied. Are we notified whether or not it has made it into the study between the time sort of we know that it's happening and a comment period, et cetera, right? So just on this height example, if we find out it's not taken up, when do we find out that it's not being taken up by the agency?
Right. You would find out upon issuance of the final scope, right? And the final scope can be issued anytime between the close of the comment period and prior to the issuance of the DEIS.
So, because the scope is what's used, I'm doing this exercise for myself and for others, right? So the scope, again, is what's going to be if we consider the scope to be the skeleton of the EIS, all the information they work through on each topic is what sort of creates the body of the document. And so if we don't make it into that skeleton, there's not going to be sort of meat on the bone there as it relates to any item that we bring forward. So it's very important.
Yeah, I was just going to say
the skeleton. There you go.
Right.
It's very important that when we're bringing things to be considered, they're very relevant to the topics that are all outlined. Joe?
Yeah, that's generally right.
Just a question for Ethan. In our past experience, we have testified at scoping hearings and put specific things on the table. And based upon those things on the table, they then are studied. It's not an option that nothing can be studied. I've never seen that before, especially when multiple stakeholders say study X or study Y, having done this in, like you, for decades, where the agencies can just ignore multiple stakeholders saying study this element.
Right. So I think to use somewhat more precise terminology, all of the comments must be considered for study.
Correct.
But if whether it's you or 5 or 10 or 15 or 20 people say, study 100-story buildings, we're not going to study them because it's not reasonable to study them, right? So I can't, this is all hypothetical, so I can't tell you what would be studied or not. But what I can say is that everything is considered, everything is actually documented, and there'll be a response to comments in the final scope for all the public comments that were issued. And in that response, there'll be an articulation as to what decision was made. If something was decided that it is not going to be studied because it's not warranted or it's not realistic, then that decision will be made in that document. But I also don't want to presume by saying that things won't be studied, right? It's just everything must get considered.
So Manhattan Community Board 4 will be very specific on making sure certain elements are studied, and we will be addressing NYCHA and HPD directly to request that study.
Yeah, sorry.
Otherwise-
To follow up on that, I just wanted to ask you to reiterate who it is that makes the final decision on what actually is worthy of study.
So the final decision is made by the co-lead agencies for the project, right? Which is the environmental review groups at NYCHA and at HPD. They coordinate with each other, make determinations as to what the final scope says, and the final scope basically instructs the consultant that's doing the EIS as to exactly what gets studied.
Thank you for that. I know we could go on at length about this, but I need to go to the public. Carrie, if that's okay with you, colleagues up there, folks in the room, we're going to start with you. If you have questions, we're going to limit comments to just 1 minute this evening. I want to be cognizant of everybody's time. I have sign-in sheets, but if you'd like to speak, please raise your hand. I'm happy to come over there with a microphone. And we'll go from there. And I will be doing 1 minute comment or question, but you have an opportunity to get a response too. Hi. The facility literally closes tonight.
We can't hear.
Go ahead.
We are being told that we have in our buildings, we're full of lead, asbestos, and mold. And I would like to know, what is the environmental impact on the whole community? Between maybe 14th Street all the way to 28th Street, from 12th Avenue all the way maybe to 8th Avenue. I would like to know, because I'm sure people have, pulmonary problems, so we got to consider the whole community, because this is really going to impact a lot of families and neighbors. Simon?
Thanks for that comment. So all those things would be analyzed in the environmental impact statement.
Next up in the room, Mike, I see your hand up. If we're going to go one more comment in the room, and then I'll go over to you, please. Who was next? Folks aren't raising their hand. If you guys want to line up, you want to come on over, Alexa?
Hi, everyone. Good evening. I still want NYCHA as Section 9. And I understand that you could not answer a lot of questions today because you're a realtor and, you're doing your job. And I see that Jamar is answering everything for us, which you should gather that information to us and explain it. And I don't like codes because I don't understand codes.
Thank you. And Simon, can you just explain the difference between Section 9 and Section 8 and the as succinctly as you can?
Sure. So part of the way that we would facilitate financing this project paying for the reconstruction of the buildings is through the conversion of the property from one funding platform to another funding platform. That's Section 9, the current public housing program, to project-based Section 8. We would utilize a combination of the federal Section 18 and rental assistance demonstration programs, which together increase the level of funding that we receive per unit, and also include a number of really important protections for residents to make sure that their rights are preserved through this transition. I also just want to point out that we really are up here with a group, including the development team, because we are partners in this work. I'm a representative of NYCHA. I'm not a realtor, and want to make sure that you have the most accurate information possible. It's not feasible for one person to have all of that in their brain at one time. So I'm working with our partners here to make sure that we can get you the right information.
Thanks, Simon. Mike Noble online with your hand up. Mike, are you there?
I am.
Thank you. Go ahead.
Yeah, thanks. It's been illustrative, I must say. I've listened to everything, and I'm putting myself in the shoes of some of the folks who live around here who might, have been at this meeting, looking at it either on the Zoom or YouTube or whatever. And I'd like for them to understand exactly what happened here tonight. If somebody could give a concise description of what it is that we actually did, right? What the EIS is all about, where it ends up, who's constrained by whatever is finally resolved with the EIS, that sort of thing. Just tell them, this is why we're doing this. This is what it's all about. Something that folks would understand, the folks who are worried about Section 8 and Section 9 and that kind of thing. Is there somebody who can do that?
Well, Mike, in their presentation in the upfront, they explained what the scope means and what an EIS is. So I'm not sure if you were here for that.
No, yeah, I was. I said, I'd like to wrap it up. Okay, wrap it up, because this happened a couple of hours ago. Let these folks know what's going to happen now. Right.
Like, we still have more comments from the public this evening.
Okay. All right.
And we did go through sort of next steps, and we're going to continue to, we'll summarize that at the end of the meeting for sure.
Okay. That's all I'm asking. That's all I'm asking. Thanks a lot. That's it. That's it.
Next up, just introduce yourself and. Sure. So it's your opportunity, what you want to use the moment, right? It's public session. So we certainly will allow broad comment as well. Just make sure you're speaking into the mic. Push that button so it's green. There you go.
Celines Miranda. Demolition tenants have come up here with crocodile tears, playing a violin, and with cucaracha arguments. If you don't want to raise your kids, as you say, deplorable conditions, if your health is so bad and you feel so unsafe, then why not leave on a Section 8 voucher? I wouldn't put my family at risk if I felt so strongly about living here. You still have to wait 3, 6 years or more to move into the new buildings. Just move out now. Also, for those that want new buildings, if you want to speed up the process, you should also be demanding to see the survey. Hector, come on already. Show us those numbers so we can get started. And a lot of you are selling yourself short. Ask for your $5,000 like so many others got. Not me. I've been here long enough and I know the value of this land. I would take more, like Iggy Wiggy has. So many of you have settled for a washer and dryer. The smart ones have settled for more, who all of a sudden have their kids going to Avenues, the world school. By the way, a couple of months ago, I saw an HOU worker and his mommy walking into Avenues. What is Avenues' role in this? I asked. They never responded when I reached out to them, seeking help and to inform them of the possible changes and its effect on the community. It's been 9 months and not one of the 4 departments in Avenues that I reached out to ever responded. We are insisting on seeing a breakdown of the survey. Danielle Sherrod from HUD told us that we need 1,001 signatures, but will willingly and without any care approve the destruction of a whole community on a 570 count who want demolition. Keep in mind, the count is between Fulton, Elliott, and Chelsea. 570 over an estimate of 4,000 or more tenants is not the majority. This is not democratic and an absolute shame. And the people involved dare to walk with their heads up high. Shame on you, Related. Shame on you, Essence. Shame on you, HOU, NYCHA, and TA board members.
Thank you. Anybody else, members of the public in the room? Two more, hold on. You can come on up and speak.
Okay, thank you. Hi, Marnie Halassa. Yeah, I just wanted to say that like so many legitimate organizations, Human Rights Watch, the Government Accounting Office, the National Law Housing Project, have all shown like massive problems with privatization and demolition. Even Legal Aid and Community Service Society are against the demolition. But all this seems to be glossed over by CB4. I would like CB4 to ask the developers to respond to what these organizations have found. So that's something I think is very important. I mean, like ask them to respond to like all this evidence. And also important is that there's an article titled "That the Tenant Never Wins" by Human Rights Watch. And the report documents significant increases in evictions and developments. In addition, tenants felt pressured into signing leases without fully understanding them, ongoing habitability issues, and potentially dangerous construction practices with little redress. So there's all these organizations out there that are saying, like, showing horrible things happening when there's privatization and demolition. So you should actually ask them how to respond to that, because they're not going to have an answer. So that's what I have to say.
Thank you. I saw another hand up. Miguel, want to come on up if you want to?
Thanks. So what I want is to ask NYCHA for clarification. I'm Miguel Acevedo, TA, president of Albert Fulton Houses. So as they keep bringing up Section 9, Section 8, whether we go through demolition or renovation of these units, the Section 8 voucher is in this, whether you like it or not. These buildings are going to be Section 8, and that's what was approved by the working group. Moving forward on the new plan, it's still going to be Section 8. So it's not going to ever stay Section 9. So face the fact. The truth is the truth. And I want clarification from NYCHA to say this Rat Pack deal, whether it's renovation or new buildings, is Section 8. Or both. Right.
Thank you, Miguel. Any comments or stuff to respond to there?
Sure.
On the Section 9.
Yeah,
Section 8
sure.
stuff. Thank
So,
you. Folks, if you, there's going to be a response. Thank you.
So I give presentations about the PACT program all over the city every week. And often these various reports that Ms. Halassa mentioned are cited. And I have to say that a lot of the information that's out there is about the PACT program is incorrect. There have been reports about projects that have gone through RAD across the country, but we implement the PACT program in a very specific way. We have not seen an increase in evictions under PACT compared to the public housing program. And further, the Human Rights Watch report that was also mentioned, the Human Rights Watch report that was also referenced, we reached out to them because there were a lot of allegations in there about issues that tenants were dealing with after properties transitioned to project-based Section 8, because as the team that oversees the PACT program, we want to make sure that we're putting it to good use and in the service of our residents. Human Rights Watch declined to give us any information about the allegations that they accused us and the PACT program of. As I say, whenever I go out and give presentations about PACT, if you hear about an issue that maybe your neighbor or a friend is dealing with at a PACT property, I'm happy to look into that. But again, a lot of the accusations are unsubstantiated. So again, that is incorrect. That's incorrect information. The report from City Limits actually quoted the number of evictions proceedings that had been initiated, not the number of evictions that had taken place. So that there is a piece of misinformation that I correct often.
So unless there is any more, yes, another hand for the public. Come on up.
Okay, my name is Renee, and I do have some few questions. First of all, who is the person who is in petition to reveal the survey numbers? You're having problems answering that one, aren't you? Okay.
Do you want me to answer that right now?
Yes.
Well, so Citizens Housing and Planning Council is the organization that conducted and tallied the results, and they have the results. They have the information.
So if we ask them, they would be able to reveal the results. Or can you ask them since they did it for you? Or you? Or you?
Again, I've given my response to that question.
Okay, so we know there's no response and we know you're not telling the truth. And there's something, and that makes people think there's something going on. So this will continue to go on. Jamar, the gentleman next to you, who is he? Who are you? And that means? Thank you. In the future, when we have developers here, we need to know who they are. We need them identified, NYCHA, everyone identified, so we know who is who. Next, you're unable to say the MIH, mandatory inclusion aid housing, unable to say what is the zoning, whether it's 1A or 1B, unable to say why you do this at 4 p.m. To do this, I have to get home, leave my job, to rush home to help my mother to look at the Zoom. Not something that should have been done. When you give out these literatures, it's English and Spanish. I'm sure you're very much aware that we have a multicultural development. So people speak Arabic, Polish, Chinese, Cantonese and Mandarin, all these languages. Needless to say, those things should be there and they are not on the walls of our development. Needless to say, you have most likely left out a good amount of people. Let's see, elected officials get unlimited amount of time. Understand, it is our homes, our life, our community. We're the ones who need the unlimited amount of time, not them. Next, let's go next. David, you asked something. Data, how much development would be needed? You need data on that. What did you mean by that? I was on it. Mm-hmm.
Just a reminder, we
It
can't.
really has to do, yes, it's a funding mechanism. And so I think what David is seeking is what new development would be required to fund renovations, redevelopment, anything like that, right? Because those market rate units are what would be used to fund the development, which is where that is sort of come from. David, do I need to go over with more detail on the mic?
Okay.
Beyond what's available through already existing funding, right? So
Okay.
whether it's the transfer from Section 9 to Section 8,
Mhm.
additional funds would be needed to facilitate a renovation, a
Right.
demolition and rebuild. And so I think David's original question had to do with what's the minimum development needed to facilitate any of that for happening.
Okay, part of that problem is that was what the infill development was supposed to be about. The other Elliott Chelsea, better known as 401 West 25th Street, which is a garbage and disgusting. So everyone keeps saying that these buildings are supposed to fund us. That has been said in the past. It has not worked. That was the infill development. It hasn't worked. So we need to have something. Really? Jonathan Gavea said it was a one-time payment. I asked him one time. Mm-hmm.
So nobody can hear you. So hold on one second. That was a one-shot payment, West Chelsea commitment to pay from the facility infill development at 401 West 25th Street. It didn't do anything to necessarily, it wasn't a part of this plan. It's long before any of this was forward. So money went to NYCHA that was utilized, but it wasn't a part of a requirement for any of this work.
Okay. So money went to NYCHA and they made money and banked off us as it continues. So, okay. Let's see what else I marked down. And so that's about it. One thing I'm going to
Thank you.
say, and when I saw the RFP, it said 2,073 apartments. How does it go to 2,056?
I don't know. I can go back and check. Maybe there was an error in the document, but the number is 2056. There was. Joe's saying there was an error in the document. Okay.
Okay,
Thank you.
thank you. Try to come and answer sometime. It'd be nice and it'd be surprising.
Thank you. And I just want to acknowledge your comment earlier about identifying folks in the room. That was fair and on me. Partners were identified as a part of the presentation. Greg did not speak this evening, but though I should have acknowledged and called out that he was here. So thank you for that. Appreciate that, as well as all the comments that came from everybody this evening. And thank you to NYCHA and the development team for being here tonight, taking us through this as sort of a first step in this draft scope of work notice of intent process. What is official is that the clock has started. And so now I have the responsibility, since Carrie had to drop as my first night as co-chair, of telling you all of you what your assignments are as it relates to this document and going through the draft scope of work, which is 60-something pages, I think. 65 pages, not a lot considering the EIS is going to be thousands of pages, just flagging that for you. So what we want to talk about tonight is individual assignments, and we'll go around for that. And then what we will be preparing our sort of fellow committees for is that when the time comes, this committee alone will not be taking up each of these topics. Tonight, that will be the case as we go into our February meeting. But once the draft EIS becomes a fuller document, we're going to parse it out to WPE, to transportation, to housing, et cetera, to take on those individual aspects of it, because many of them are thick, as a number of us know. So I'm going to call out, I'm going to run through sort of the assignments. And as you hear your name, note down what you're doing. We'll go to sort of raise your hand at the end, but this is with the list that Carrie and I put together. Betty, we're going to assign you the land use, zoning, and public policies section. Paul, socioeconomic conditions. Hector, community facility and services. Lowell, open spaces. He will find out about it even though he's not here. Bert is getting shadows and noise. He also is not here and we'll find out about it. David, in a surprise to no one, historic and cultural resources. Viren, urban design and visual resources. Tina, natural resources. Marty, water and sewer infrastructure. Inga, solid waste and sanitation services and energy. Mike Noble, hazardous materials and public health. Gregory, air quality and greenhouse gas emissions and climate change. Rodney, transportation. Pamela, neighborhood character. Brad, construction and environmental justice. And for Carrie and me, it is all of the above. That was a fast list on the assignments. I'm going to follow up tomorrow with an email to everybody and reattach the document individually. Questions first in the room, and then we'll go online. Paul.
Jeffrey, you mentioned that you want these comments for the draft EIS, but I would think we want to get them into the scope.
No, draft scope.
Draft scope.
No,
okay.
we want this for our
no.
next meeting, which we're going to
Right,
talk
okay.
about our letter for draft
Okay,
scope.
you said draft, right, bunch. I just want to make sure we're on the scope.
This is on the scope. So the document you have before you is the draft scope of work, which we want to, again, read. What stands out to you as not being there? What's there and we have a question about, right? You want to ask why something is there. That's an appropriate thing to bring back next month. Like I said, plan now is to, we'll circulate the document again, these assignments as well, follow up with the folks that are not here. Obviously, people have questions. We can do teamwork on this. I know that more than just a couple of us are going to read this whole thing, but it's easier if everybody sort of, we slice and dice this accordingly. Any other questions? Joe? Joe's not allowed to read the document, by the way. I'm just kidding, Joe.
Ready, read?
Yes, I have to.
So I think we also have to have a smaller meeting talking about alternatives, because we have to get those list of alternatives for the study in the scoping as part of this document.
You mean stuff in addition to the 4 proposals that are a part of the draft scope of work?
Yeah, oh no, it is very common for a developer to come with those, whatever they're doing, and then the community says, like, for example, keep a proposal with Hudson Guild kept on.
Sure.
Like those kind of things.
Yeah, I think twofold. Something else that Karen and I forgot to mention at the top also is the small NYCHA working group that we have as well. The Chelsea Land Use Committee, the Housing Committee, the chair of the board, Madam Chait, and we meet with the development team, just sort of modeled on the Port Authority Working Group, actually, which has been very productive. So that is another in-between meeting that happens where a lot of this stuff will be discussed at detail. So I think I got to be honest, I'm going to go back and chat with Carrie, Jessica, et cetera, to see what else we want to ask from you guys for sort of in the interim in advance of our next land use meeting, which is a Tuesday. It's not a Monday because it's the Tuesday after President's Day in February. Thank you. February 20th, Tuesday, February 20th. Mark your calendars now. Be here. Same location. Same for the public. Next meeting, February 20th. Any other questions from the committee on the assignments? How about online? Jessica, does this sound okay to you right now? Thank you.
Thank you. Yes.
Marty, Betty, you guys all good with this for faces that I can see? Okay, great. Like I said, we're going to follow up with emails on this. A couple of other things to close out the meeting on new and old business. I mentioned that small working group that we have now that meets monthly with the team. Also, all the outstanding questions that remain unanswered, we are tracking those, aware of those. All that stuff is something Carrie and I are working to figure out how we were going to more clearly distribute that to the group so we know that information as we're getting it. Also, we're hoping to have some better updates on the interim or meanwhile plan in the future. And then all separate on NYCHA stuff, other land use things that are happening. The City of Yes on for economic opportunity. There's a joint letter being drafted by the Chelsea Hills Kitchen Land Use Committee. Please read that letter before our full board meeting going in. Right, Paula? Oh, you looked at me like I was crazy, but I'm not. Thank you. That letter is forthcoming. So please, as our committee, with our Hell's Kitchen colleagues taking the lead on that, be prepared to give comments or opine accordingly. Contact Paul directly will make the most sense for that. Any questions on City of Yes? Any other bits of new business or comments or committee updates this evening? Brad, hold on one sec for a microphone.
Any news? We hear a lot from the tenants about repairs that are supposed to be going on. Just curious on where that's at.
Sure. So as part of the overall project, because the replacement buildings are not going to be provided for several years, there was a commitment by Essence and Related to start supplementing NYCHA property management efforts on site. They're going to phase in over time with more services, but to begin, they're going to be providing enhanced security and pest control services. That's slated to begin as early as next month. And any immediate repair needs are the responsibility of NYCHA property management. Up until the time that the replacement buildings are constructed and the residents move in, NYCHA property management will remain the responsible party for making any repairs and also doing maintenance and cleaning. As the Essence and Related teams functions on site increase, they'll also be helping to address issues such as mold and leaks, and they'll also be helping to turn over any vacant units that will help with any temporary moves that are required on site.
Brad, one thing, Brad, we asked NYCHA to come to the Housing, Health, Human Services Committee in December. Both Maria and I were ill, so that had to be postponed to January. And then unfortunately, Jamar had COVID, so it was postponed. At our February meeting, we have a full presentation with details, step-by-step, about current repairs, what they're focusing on, and deadlines. So please, you can watch that on Zoom. They were completely, the information that was sent to the board back in December was not consistent with that commitment. So that's why we want to talk to them further, and they're going to work through with us and have a full public discussion.
It is a part of every single discussion that we have as both the working group and in general points on that. Anything to add on that? More? Any more on that? Okay, thank you. Hold on, if we're gonna, if you're gonna comment on this, I need you to be on the microphone. Miguel, I just want you on a microphone, that's all, because then the people on Zoom can't hear it. Come on.
No. Basically, I'm glad that you did bring that up, Brad. We also have a public safety issue that needs to be addressed. We met as a team about a month ago. The postman said he's refusing to deliver mail at a certain address in Elliott, Chelsea, because he's threatened every time he goes in. 2 days later, 2 days later, 2 individuals were shot in the lobby of the same building. Okay. Just last week, I had a tenant who was hysterical because there was an individual with a butcher knife standing outside her door that she filmed with her Ring camera. So as much as meanwhile is important, so is the public safety issue we're dealing with.
Thank you, Miguel. Important to continue raising that for certain. Thank you. Any other bits of new information, new business, old business tonight from the committee? Any final comments, questions online? Okay, with that, I'll take a motion to adjourn. Paul makes a motion. I see a second from Pamela. Thank you, everybody. Stay safe. It's slippery out there. Bye, all.